You can forget faces, you can forget dates, you can even forget the names of towns you fought for, but you never forget the voice. Not that voice, the one that comes crackling over the radio in the middle of hell asking you to do the impossible. The one that asks you to weigh a piece of ground against the lives of your men. My name is John Redding. I carried that weight for 22 years in the United States Army. And today, I want to tell you about the day I finally set it down, or rather, traded it for a different burden. This is the story of Operation Swift Hand, a lost ridge in Afghanistan, and the two voices that still argue in my head every single day. It begins in the cold, thin air of the Hindu Kush, October 12, 2008. My Bravo company had been given what we called a sure thing, a high-value target, cornered in a village called Galman in Kunar province. We were the hammer. The anvil was a sister unit blocking the escape routes. Clean, quick, professional. That's what the briefing slide said. The mountains of Afghanistan, however, have never read a PowerPoint. We inserted under a moonless sky. The Chinook helicopters dropped us in a dry riverbed about 2 kilometers west of the target. I remember the silence the most. Not peaceful silence, the heavy, watchful silence of a place holding its breath. We moved out in staggered columns, a ghostly procession through terraced fields. My lead scout, Specialist Martinez, raised a fist. We froze. He pointed to the eastern ridgeline, a jagged black cutout against the stars. "Feels like we're being watched, sir." He was right. We were. We were. The first shot was a single, high-pitched crack. A Dragunov sniper rifle. It didn't come from the village. It came from that ridge. The round struck my radio operator, Corporal Jenkins, square in the chest plate. The force knocked him off his feet. Before the echo died, the night erupted. Machine gun fire raked our position from the north and west. Rocket-propelled grenades whooshed overhead, exploding against mud walls. We were in a perfect L-shaped ambush, caught in a kill zone we had just walked into. Chaos. Controlled chaos at first. My platoon sergeants, Rook and Chen, were already barking orders, returning fire, pulling wounded into cover. But the radio net was pure bedlam. Every squad was reporting contact. The mission was dead. We were now in a fight for survival. And then his voice. Clear, calm, and utterly detached from the dirt, blood, and fear surrounding me. It was Major Briggs, our battalion operations officer, calling from the Tactical Operations Center at Bagram Airfield. Bravo 6, this is Sabre 3. We are watching your drone feed. You are in an L-shaped ambush. The primary threat is the sniper on the eastern ridge, grid WF 328,491. You must assault and clear that position. It is key terrain. I stared at the ridge. It was a near vertical climb of about 300 meters covered in scree and boulders. To assault it under direct fire from above was suicide for at least half my company. My men were pinned in the village, fighting for their lives. My gut, that deep instinctual part of command they can't teach at West Point, screamed at me. Sabre 3, Bravo 6, I said, trying to keep my voice flat. Negative. My elements are scattered and pinned. I am consolidating for a fighting retreat to the exfilled point. We cannot take that ridge. The pause that followed was filled with the static of distant gunfire from his end. Then his voice returned, colder. Bravo 6, that is not a request. That is a directive. The mission parameters are unchanged. Secure the ridge, then proceed to the target building. That sniper nest is enabling the entire ambush. You will take it. In that moment, 2 versions of me stood at a crossroads. One was Captain John Redding, the career officer who followed orders, who understood doctrine, who knew that key terrain was a hill you died for. The other was Jack, the man who knew every one of my soldiers' first names, who had signed letters to their parents, who had promised a young private first class just last week that I'd get him home in one piece. I looked at Rook. He was pressing a bandage against a young soldier's leg, his own sleeve dark with blood. He met my eyes and gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Don't do it. I keyed my mic. I made my choice. All Bravo elements. This is Bravo 6. Listen up. New plan. We are not assaulting the ridge. 1st and 2nd platoons lay down maximum suppressing fire on that high ground. 3rd platoon, you are the maneuver element. Prepare to break contact. We are pulling back to the LZ, bounding by squad. We are leaving now. I switched back to Briggs's frequency. Sabre 3, Bravo 6, I am breaking contact and exfiltrating my company. The tactical situation does not support your directive. My priority is preserving my force. Bravo 6, out. I didn't wait for a response. For the next 90 minutes, we fought our way back through that valley. It was a brutal yard-by-yard retreat. We used smoke grenades, coordinated covering fire, and sheer, stubborn will. We carried Jenkins' body and 4 other wounded. We left the target. We left the ridge. We left our confidence in flawless intelligence on that dirt. When the rescue birds finally thundered in, the miniguns on their doors hosing down the tree lines, it felt less like victory and more like escape. On the Chinook ride back, sitting amid the exhausted, bleeding, silent men, the weight of what I'd done settled on me. It was physical. I could feel the stares of the men who knew I'd just torched my career for them. I could feel the ghost of Briggs's disapproval like a chill. Back at forward operating base right, the confrontation was brief and icy. Major Briggs met me on the landing pad, his uniform clean, his face a mask of controlled anger. Captain Redding, a word. He led me to a quiet corner. You directly disobeyed a combat order. You abandoned the mission. You left a strategic piece of terrain in enemy hands. There will be consequences. I was too tired, too hollow for diplomacy. With all due respect, sir, the mission was a trap. The terrain wasn't strategic. It was a death trap. I brought 80 men in. I'm bringing 75 back. That's the only metric that matters to me tonight. He just looked at me, and in his eyes I saw my future. Not as a promising field commander, but as a cautionary tale. The paperwork arrived 2 days later. A formal reprimand in my file for failure to follow orders and poor tactical judgment. The whispers started immediately. I was the officer who broke under pressure, the one who chose sentiment over strategy. But in the days that followed, other things happened too. Sergeant Rook stopped by my quarters and left a bottle of whiskey on my desk without a word. Corporal Chen, his arm in a sling, saluted me with his good hand and said, "My wife thanks you, sir." A young private I'd dragged behind a wall found me and stammered, I wouldn't be here, sir. Thank you." That was the trade. My reputation for their respect, my career for their lives. At night, lying in my cot, I'd hear the 2 voices, Briggs's crisp, logical directive, "Take the ridge," and the ragged breathing sounds of my men on the radio. "We can't move. We're pinned." I thought I understood the full cost. I thought the story ended with a stalled promotion and early retirement. I was wrong. The ridge in Gelman wasn't done with me, and the man we left behind in that village, he was just getting started. Because the consequences of a decision on a battlefield don't end when the guns go silent. They ripple outward like a stone thrown into a dark pond, touching shores you never even knew existed. As I looked at them, I thought of the final term of my treaty. My legacy would not be the ridge I didn't take or the career I lost. It would be these men and women, armed not with rifles but with empathy, standing in the gap for the next generation of the wounded. And perhaps in some small way it would also be the 2 sons in Pakistan whose pain I now understood and whose future I silently vowed to honor by continuing the work of building peace, one veteran, one story at a time. The 2 voices are quiet now. They've said all they needed to say. In their place is a single, steady note. The work continues. The soldier's diary is never truly closed. It is simply passed to the next hand, ready to write their own chapter of struggle, survival, and slow, hard-won redemption. The formal reprimand from Operation Swift Hand was, in the grand scheme of the Army, a small piece of paper. But in the ecosystem of a military career, it was a poison. I was passed over for Major the first time and the second. The message was clear. John Redding was a competent officer, but he was not reliable in the way the bureaucracy required. He valued the wrong metrics. It was a professional exile. Every day in a cubicle reviewing supply manifests, I'd see that ridge. I'd hear Briggs's voice. Meanwhile, the war ground on, and about a year after Swift Hand, I was reviewing after-action reports, part of my new dismal job, when a name leapt off the page. Gelman. A different company from a different brigade had been tasked with clearing that same valley. Their intelligence indicated the village was now a major staging point. The report was clinical, detached. It described a heavy volume of accurate sniper fire from the eastern ridge that had a degraded operational tempo and resulted in the significant casualties during the approach. They had attempted to assault the ridge. They had followed the order my gut had refused. 4 Kia, 11 wounded. The mission was ultimately aborted. I sat in my fluorescent-lit office, the hum of the computer the only sound. I saw the names of the dead. Kids, 19, 20 years old. I saw the name of their commander, a captain I'd never met. He had done everything by the book. He had taken the key to reign, and he had left 4 of his men on it. The weight I had carried, the weight of my disobedient choice, was suddenly joined by a new terrible gravity, the weight of the alternate outcome. The path not taken by me, but taken by him. The ghost of my decision had gotten his men killed. That day, the war inside me changed. It was no longer about doubting my choice. It was about understanding its horrifying fractal consequences. I served another 5 years, competently, quietly. I made lieutenant colonel eventually, a consolation prize for a career of good service marred by one incident. But the fire was gone. The purpose had curdled into procedure. I retired in 2014 with a full pension, a chest full of medals that felt like lead, and a soul full of static. The civilian world was a foreign country without a map. The structure of the army, the uniforms, the salutes, the clear chain of command was gone. In its place was a vast, silent emptiness. The nightmares, which I'd managed by sheer routine, returned with a vengeance, not of the bullets, but of the paperwork. I'd dream of signing the reprimand over and over. I'd dream of the Galman after-action report, the names blurring and swirling and swirling. I'd wake up exhausted. I drifted. I tried consulting. I tried writing. I bought a house and spent days staring at the wall, listening to the 2 voices argue. Briggs, you failed the mission. My men, you saved us. The ghosts of the other unit. What about us? I was a satellite whose tether had been cut, drifting into the dark. The lifeline came from Sergeant First Class Marcus Aruk Rooker. He left the Army a year after me. He found me, not on a battlefield, but in the cereal aisle of a grocery store, looking lost. He didn't mince words. Sir, you look like hell. Feels like it, Rook. Still listening to those ghosts. They're the only ones who talked to me. He took me to a diner. Over bad coffee, he told me about his new life. He was working with a veterans outreach group. I see them every day, sir. The new kids back from the sandbox. They're not all missing limbs. Most of them are just missing the point. They come home and the world is too soft, too loud, too confusing. They're carrying things they can't name. Guilt, doubt, the face of the guy they couldn't see. The order they wish they hadn't followed. He looked at me, his eyes the same steady anchors they'd been in Kunar. They need to hear from someone who carried a weight everyone could see. They need to hear your story, not the hero version, the true one. The one where you saved us and it broke you. I resisted. What wisdom do I have, Rook? How to ruin a career? How to live with knowing your choice got other men killed? Exactly that, sir, he said, leaning forward. That is the wisdom, that there is no clean choice, that the weight is the proof you cared, that you can carry it without letting it crush you. They think they're alone in that feeling. You can show them they're not. He dragged me, kicking and screaming internally, to a peer support group. It was in a church basement. Folding chairs, bad coffee, a circle of men and women in their 20s and 30s. They weren't the grizzled old vets of movies. They were kids with haunted eyes and young faces, and they talked. They talked about a patrol where they'd hesitated, about a friend they'd lost to and why they felt they should have seen, about the hollow feeling of coming home to a parade and then sitting alone in a dark apartment. One, a former Marine corporal named Jake, said, I keep replaying this one moment. This house in Fallujah. I kicked in the door. There was a man inside. I had a split second. Was he reaching for a weapon or just scared? I fired. It was just a radio. He was just scared. And I have to live with that every day. My co said it was a good shoot. The rules of engagement said it was justified. But I have to live with it. He wasn't looking for absolution. He was looking for someone who understood the unshareable burden of a split-second decision. He was looking for someone who knew that the true war begins when you start fighting your own memory. In that moment, the 2 voices in my head, Briggs and my men, finally fell silent. A third voice, my own, found its way out. I started to speak. I told them about Gelman, not as a war story, but as a confession. I told them about the weight of the reprimand, the taste of professional failure, the corrosive doubt. I told them about reading that after-action report and feeling responsible for men I'd never met. I laid my own weight on the table in all its ugly, complicated glory. And I saw it in their eyes, not pity, but recognition, a profound, relieved recognition. You too? The room didn't feel so cold anymore. The weight didn't feel so unique. That night, for the first time in years, I didn't dream of paperwork. I dreamed of that circle of chairs. Rook was right. My new mission wasn't to forget the ridge or to win the argument with Briggs. It was to build a bridge from my experience to theirs, to turn my burden into a tool. Rook and I started working together formally. We called it the After Action Review for Life. We used military framework, not to refight wars, but to process them. We taught men like Jake how to conduct their own personal R. What was the situation? What was the decision? What were the intended and unintended consequences? How do you integrate that and march on? We didn't offer therapy. We offered camaraderie and a framework. We offered the understanding that the moral injury of command, at any level, is a wound that needs acknowledgement, not just a bandage. It was working, but a part of me knew this was still the middle of the story. I was helping others carry their weight, but I hadn't yet faced the final, most personal ripple from Galman, the man we left behind. The target, the ghost who started it all. And as fate would have it, he wasn't done with me. He was about to bring the war full circle to the last place I ever expected. 5 years had passed since I'd started working with Rook at the After Action Review. We'd built something real. We weren't just a support group. We were a bridge battalion, helping veterans cross from the world of war back into the world of life. I'd found a rhythm. The nightmares were less frequent. The two arguing voices in my head had settled into a tense but manageable ceasefire. I'd even started writing a book. Not a memoir, but a field manual for moral injury. I thought my story had settled into its final quiet shape. Then the email arrived. The subject line was blank. The sender's name was unfamiliar. KL at GVACH. The body was brief, precise, and it stopped my heart. Colonel Redding, I have followed your recent work with great interest. Your concept of the moral R is insightful. Perhaps we have a shared case study to discuss. I will be in Washington, D.C. next month. I would be pleased to meet. I believe you know me by a different name. In Kunar, they called me the accountant. Sincerely, Khalid Al-Sheikh, Senior Conflict Mediator, Center for Humanitarian Dialogue. The accountant, the high-value target. The ghost of Galman, the man whose presence had drawn my company into that ambush. The man we left behind. For 15 years, he'd been a blurry photo on a briefing slide. Now, he was a man with an email signature asking for a meeting. Every instinct screamed trap. Panic, cold and familiar, tightened my chest. Was this a setup? Revenge? I called Rook. His reaction was pure steadying Rook. Hey, sir, an assassin doesn't send a meeting invite from a CH domain. He sends a rocket through your window. This is something else. But you don't go alone. The meeting was set for a secure, neutral location, a conference room at a university's conflict resolution center. I brought Rook. He stood by the door, a silent, solid presence. I sat at the table, my heart pounding like it hadn't since that night in Kunar. The door opened. He was not what I expected. No beard, no scowl. A man in his late 50s, wearing a neat tweed jacket and wire-rimmed glasses. He looked like a professor. He carried a leather satchel, not a weapon. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw not hatred, but a profound, weary recognition. Colonel Redding, he said, his English polished with a faint British accent. Thank you for coming. This is a long-awaited conversation for me. Mr. Al-Shaki, I said, my voice thankfully steady. I have to admit, your invitation was a shock. For me as well, he said, sitting gracefully. But your public talks, your writings, they reached my desk. When I realized who you were, I knew we had to speak, not as predator and prey, as two commanders who survived the same battle. He opened his satchel and pulled out a file, not a weapon, a map. It was a detailed topographic map of the Kunar Valley, centered on Galman. He spread it on the table, his fingers tracing the lines. You see this ridge? He said, pointing to the eastern ridge. My sniper team was here. A father and his 2 sons from the village. They were not Al-Qaeda. They were farmers I had paid to protect my meeting that night. I was not there to plan attacks. I was there to negotiate a ceasefire between two rival tribal factions. The American drone that spotted me saw a meeting of armed men. Your intelligence saw a terrorist council. I felt the room tilt. Not to you. You're saying the ambush, it was a tragic misunderstanding, he finished, his voice soft. My fighters were tribal militiamen there to guarantee safe passage for the elders. When your helicopters came, they panicked. They fired first. The father on the ridge shot your radio operator to protect his village from what he thought was an annihilation force. He was not a trained sniper. He was a man with a hunting rifle, scared for his home. The weight of 15 years shifted, mutated. The clean narrative of a trap of evil versus good dissolved into the murky human reality of fear and miscalculation. The dragon I had carried was, in part, a man protecting his chickens. I asked, my throat tight. Because I read your account of that night, he said, looking directly at me. You spoke of the weight of your decision. I carry the reciprocal weight. The father on the ridge, Ali, was killed by your gunship on Ixville. His sons blame me for his death. The ceasefire I was brokering died that night. The tribal war that followed killed over 100 people. For 15 years, I have carried the weight of those 100 and of Ali and of your men who were wounded. I became a terrorist because of that night, so I changed my path. I left the mountains. I studied. I now work to stop fights, not to wage them. He slid the map toward me. You made a choice that night, Colonel. You refused to sacrifice your men for a piece of ground. In doing so, you also refused to sacrifice them for a mistake. You saved them from a fight that should never have happened. I am here to thank you for that restraint. I was silent, utterly disarmed. The ghost had become a man. The monster had become a peacemaker. The voice of the enemy was thanking me for my disobedience. The ridge I finally managed. I was just a ridge, he said. It was never key terrain. It was just a high place where a frightened man stood. Your Major Briggs was wrong. You were right, not just tactically, morally. We talked for 2 hours. We compared timelines. We shared our burdens. We deconstructed the fog of war together over cold tea. It was the most profound after-action review of my life. When we stood to leave, he extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, I took it. There is one more thing, he said. The sons, the boys who lost their father, they are no longer boys. They are men, angry men. They are in Pakistan. They are the reason I cannot go home. They are the unfinished business of Galman. I tell you this not for guilt, but for clarity. Our decisions create orphans, and orphans grow up. The ripple does not stop. Walking out of that building, the Washington sun felt different on my skin. The war was over. Truly over, not because I'd won or because I'd found peace, but because I had finally met my counterpart across the wire and discovered he was just a man carrying his own version of the same weight. The symmetry was devastating and beautiful. I didn't find closure that day. Closure is a fairy tale. I found something better, understanding. And with understanding comes a new kind of duty. A month later, I was back with my group. I told them the story. I told them about the accountant. I told them about the map, the father on the ridge, the ripples of a single bullet. I saw the same recognition in their eyes, but deeper now. They saw that the enemy is human, that guilt is universal, and that the path forward isn't about forgetting, but about connecting the fragments until you see the whole, terrible, complicated picture. Last week, I stood at the graduation of our first formal Ridge Battalion cohort. 20 veterans, Jake among them, now certified as peer support specialists. They were heading out to help others. The ripple from Galman, which had once spread only pain, was now spreading healing. As I looked at them, I thought of the final term of my treaty. My legacy would not be the ridge I didn't take or the career I lost. It would be these men and women, armed not with rifles but with empathy, standing in the gap for the next generation of the wounded. And perhaps in some small way it would also be the 2 sons in Pakistan whose pain I now understood and whose future I silently vowed to honor by continuing the work of building peace, one veteran, one story at a time. The 2 voices are quiet now. They've said all they needed to say. In their place is a single, steady note. The work continues. The soldier's diary is never truly closed. It is simply passed to the next hand, ready to write their own chapter of struggle, survival, and slow, hard-won redemption.